Hello, everyone. So, I've been thinking about doing this for a really long time, starting a podcast. And I think it came from a place of just having so many stories and experiences over the years. I've been making music professionally now for 10 years, which is kind of crazy. It's not even true. 18, 28, yeah, 10 years. And I just feel like going from someone that didn't grow up around artists, at least not artists in a professional sense, had no network, no experience, no self-confidence, and like coming to a place where now I've worked in the music industry for 10 years, releasing my own music that isn't particularly commercial, and still somehow managing to create a life that is interesting and exciting and at times incredibly intense, but also challenges me in new ways all the time. And I feel like sharing more about it, because I know that for me, listening to other people open up and be vulnerable and kind of letting me see behind the curtain of this perfect image that we sometimes create. Sometimes people do it consciously and they want to appear like their work is effortless, which they're allowed to do. But I think sometimes we don't even realize that what we're putting out seems like it's just this perfect final product. And, we portray ourselves in a certain way, especially as artists, because it's also a part of our artistic expression that maybe conveys the message that we are just a different type of human and that other people could never do this kind of work, which is definitely not true. And I think I just want to highlight some of the struggles and obstacles that are a part of all creative journeys. And for me, like a fitting title for this podcast and also that topic is The Overgrown Path, because that is, if you know my music, that is a song that I released on my last album. And to me, this song really encapsulates the journey that I've been on. Also just this constant questioning of whether I'm on the right path, especially when you don't have anyone that you can really look to that has done the same thing, which I think is the case for a lot of us, but especially people that maybe work in creative industries or are self-employed or are maybe wanting to be self-employed, because there is no clear roadmap. And so each step you take kind of unfolds the path in front of you. And that can be really daunting sometimes and requires a lot of faith in yourself and that things will kind of pan out the way that you intend them to. So, I think I'll start off this podcast, this first episode, with just talking a little bit about my own journey. I know I already mentioned some of it, but for those of you that might be interested, and also just to know where I'm coming from in creating this, I started writing songs when I was around 11, 12 years old, and I had been playing the piano for a while. I had piano lessons, but I had no ambitions to become a professional musician. To me, it was just not something that I ever considered. I remember in school people telling me like, oh, you should, try to enter some kind of music competition or some game show or something. And I always just thought, no, that's not for me. I wrote songs after school. I loved playing songs. I loved listening to music. But it just seemed like a hobby, and that was all it was, and that was all it could ever be, because I'd never seen anyone do it successfully within kind of my little world that I was growing up in. And then around 16, I had a really bad crash out where I got a severe anxiety disorder. It kind of started from getting panic attacks during exams, and then it just escalated further and further until it was like a full-on agoraphobia. So I couldn't leave the house without getting really anxious. And that also led to some chronic, like physical illness related to the anxiety, which, just kind of became a perfect storm of teenagehood, but also, mental health issues. And during this time, I barely wrote at all. This is also something that I find like an interesting topic, that you kind of get this romanticized image of the mentally ill artist that creates beautiful work. But in my opinion, or at least in my experience, I have to say, that was not the case at all. Like during this time, I wasn't singing, I wasn't producing anything. I was just depressed and sad and scared. And of course, that experience definitely informed me. And that is something that I also want to focus on more with this podcast, is to kind of highlight how struggles that we go through and obstacles that we face, even though I don't want to romanticize them in any kind of way, because they can just be horrible experiences. But sometimes it is true that those experiences really shape you and deepen your experience, and also really end up informing your art and your life choices. So they can be blessings in disguise sometimes, not always. But anyways, at this point, I was mainly at home. I didn't know what my future was going to be at all, and whether I was going to be able to finish school, whether I would have to get some like serious psychological help. And then I went to the cinema with my mother and sister, and I remember I was feeling super anxious. I hated it. I think I could only do it because it was like an outdoor cinema. We watched this random movie called Love and Mercy, which is about the life of Brian Wilson, who was the producer and also a member of the Beach Boys. And he had mental health struggles throughout his life, was also medicated, and the movie shows the trajectory of his life. And in the end, he's an old man. He's being abused by his doctor, who's like prescribing him way too much heavy medication. And still, even though he's kind of not himself, he sits down at the piano as an old man and just starts playing for himself. That was like the moment that for some reason something clicked in my brain. And I thought, I know that when I'm an old woman, I want to sit down at the piano and play for myself, because it's such an important part of my expression and my connection to myself and the world and others. Realizing that then made me think, okay, well, if that's something that I want to do when I'm an old woman, then why not at least give myself the chance to also do it now, and to try to do it as my profession, because obviously that means that I'll get to spend a lot more time and energy making music my entire life, not just when I'm an old woman. That was the beginning of me putting myself out there. First, I posted covers on YouTube and also original songs, and then that kind of led to me being discovered by my first manager. More or less, the story is a bit more complex, but I'll spare you the details. Anyways, which was, incredible, because he was a great guy. He is a great guy. And I was just really lucky to find him at that point in time. I went back to school. I finished school with a lot of therapy and a lot of help, but I did it. Yeah, and then through my connection with him, I managed to kind of start getting a foothold in the industry, and also just finding out, like, how do I even record music? Who are musicians that could play my music? Because like I said, I really didn't know anyone. Also, the anxiety was obviously still a big topic, even though it had gotten a lot better at this stage through MBSR therapy, which was really helpful for me at the time. Then I started playing my first concerts. I was also really lucky to find my first booking agent very early on. And I was also very blessed that the first song that I ever put out ended up kind of going viral on Spotify, which obviously helped a lot in terms of just getting some attention from industry people and proof of concept of like the type of music that I was making. Then after I released my first album, COVID hit, and I had like a really hard time during COVID, because basically all of the techniques that I taught myself in terms of dealing with my anxiety and kind of knowing that I was able to exit situations that I didn't want to be in, or take action to make myself feel more in control, all of those things kind of felt like they didn't apply anymore, because the world was just falling apart and these systems were just not working anymore. And then I had a major relapse into my anxiety disorder, and it just felt like I was like starting over again. But luckily, I went back to therapy, and it got quite a lot better, even though I have to say it was really still quite present for a while. Looking back, I mean, also the fact that that happened was definitely due to just being completely overworked and burned out, and not respecting my body's limitations. Then I released my second album with a different label, which was really like a cool experience, because I got to create this crazy album, which was just, such a cool experience to research, but also to write. COVID was still kind of happening and shows were not really easy to book and to plan. And the label was not as happy with the release as they thought they might be. And then also my manager kind of started reorienting and having some career decisions to make for himself. And so it just felt like things were kind of falling apart, especially because he had been such a crucial part of my setup and my mental stability in regards to my music. In the end, we stopped working together, which was a mutual decision, but it still left me feeling incredibly sad and confused and like no one believed in me anymore, which obviously also came from a place of extreme insecurity and basically not believing in myself, and so just needing other people to believe in me, which I still feel like that's, today to a certain extent, but I think it's gotten better, and I think it got better because I had to go through this experience of just becoming more self-sufficient and self-reliant. I ended up then producing my next album, my third album, which is my latest album, Echo. That really came out of this phase of feeling extremely lost and confused and also just out of touch with myself. Like I really felt like I had nothing to say. I didn't know who I was, whether I even believed in myself and this career or whether I should just do something else. I was looking into studying psychology. Yeah, and that album really captures that confused period in my life. Also, I ended up producing the album to a large part myself, which wasn't really the plan. I was planning on working with 2 other producers, and I did to a certain extent also end up working with them, but to a much lesser extent than I had originally planned because of health reasons. And so that was also a challenge that I really hadn't expected, but that ended up teaching me a lot about myself and just my capabilities, because I wouldn't have trusted myself to go into the process saying that I was going to be the main producer for this album. But when I was more or less forced into the position, I realized that I was actually capable of it, and I actually really enjoyed the process, and I was really happy with the end result. So that was also an experience that I feel like taught me a lot about just, self-belief and the importance of also experimenting and daring to try to do things yourself, because sometimes you just think you need other people's help, but you don't really. Which is not to say that collaboration isn't a wonderful thing. It is, but I think it should come from a place of joy and curiosity rather than a place of insecurity and like lack of self-belief. And that brings us to today, more or less, where I'm past my latest album. I feel much better overall. I feel like that phase really taught me what it needed to teach me. And now I'm in a phase where I'm discovering my creative self again, my curiosity. And I just want to try new things, which obviously this podcast is one of those things. I'm going to be doing some projects this year, which I've never done before. My first ever film score is coming out very soon, which was also something I worked on last year during that time of confusion and general chaos, but which I'm really proud of. And I might be working on some more film music. I might be producing a different artist. Yeah, just generally kind of feel lighter and curious about what this year might bring. I don't want to put any pressure on myself, but I really want to make this podcast a space of exploration, of sharing, of connecting with people that are on similar journeys in their own unique way. And I think topics will include mythology, mental health, being vulnerable. I also would really love to invite some of my friends and colleagues onto this podcast, because I think it's so beautiful how everyone has their own unique journey. And like I said, so many times there are like immense obstacles in people's ways. And when you hear it from the outside, you can't really comprehend how they still manage to get to where they are today. I think that's something that we often don't really see from the outside, and that I would just love to open up about with people that I know and that would hopefully also want to open up about those topics. Obviously, it's also quite private. So let's see. But for now, please tell me what you thought of this episode, what you think of the idea. I know this is kind of weird and specific, and also I don't know if I'm particularly good at it, and even whether I will enjoy it in the future, I don't know. But you can join my newsletter via my website if you're interested. I'm sure that'll be a place where I'll keep you updated about this podcast and also shows and other things that I get up to. Yeah, thank you so much for listening. I hope this was okay. And I'll talk to you soon.